Lusada, Portugal, March 4th, 1998. The afternoon sun was warm over Lusada, the kind of quiet, bright day that hides tragedy too easily. 11-year-old Rui Pedro Teixeira Mendonça had been riding his bicycle near his mother's workplace, a small textile office on the edge of town. At around 2 o'clock, he came inside to see her, Filomena, asking if he could go for a drive with a friend. Not another child. A man. 22-year-old Afonso Diaz, someone he knew from the neighborhood. His mother refused. She told him to stay close, to play in the open field nearby until she finished work. He nodded, obedient but restless, and went back outside with his bicycle. It was the last time she saw him. Around 3 o'clock, a neighbor noticed something strange. Rui's bike, hidden in a patch of weeds near a small wooded area not far from where he'd been playing. But Rui himself was nowhere to be seen. By evening, the search had begun. First his mother, then neighbors, calling his name through the fields. By nightfall, police had arrived. Helicopters swept over the countryside. Volunteers scoured every dirt road and ditch. They found nothing. No tracks, no clothing, no sign of struggle. Witnesses later told police they had seen Rui Pedro get into a car that afternoon with Afonso Diaz, the same man his mother had told him not to go with. When questioned, Diaz admitted spending time with the boy, but denied harming him. He said he'd dropped Rui off near a local truck stop, where the boy supposedly wanted to see a prostitute. No one ever saw Rui again. The story spread quickly across Portugal. A missing boy, a small town, a case that felt like it should have had answers. Police interrogated Diaz for days. He was eventually charged, but not for murder or abduction, only for corruption of a minor, for taking Rui to a brothel that day. He served time, but the boy he took with him never came home. Then, a month later, a photograph surfaced, a fragment of color and chance that reignited everything. It came from Disneyland, Paris. The image was taken by journalist Nuno Rogero in April 1998, a simple holiday photo, meant to capture a happy moment. But in the background, sitting on a ride, was a boy who looked strikingly like Rui Pedro. Same build, same dark eyes, same quiet expression. Forensic experts analyzed it. They enlarged the image, ran comparisons, studied every contour. But the distance was too great, the picture too blurred. It was impossible to confirm. Still, for Rui's family, it was enough to believe that somewhere he might still be alive. That fragile hope lasted until the autumn of that same year. In September 1998, a massive international police operation, Operation Cathedral, exposed a global child exploitation network known as the Wonderland Club. Thousands of images were seized. Among them, investigators reportedly identified 16 children. One of them, according to multiple reports, was Rui Pedro. Authorities never confirmed the identification publicly, but for those who had followed the case, the implication was devastating. A mother's last hope replaced by silence. A disappearance transformed into something darker. Not an accident, not a runaway, but a crime that reached far beyond the borders of Portugal. Years passed. Filomena never stopped searching. She appeared on television, joined vigils, clung to every new lead. But the trail stayed cold. And in 2019, 21 years after he vanished, Rui Pedro was legally declared dead. His body has never been found. Only 2 photographs remain to tell his story. One from his life, bright and clear, and one from Disneyland, blurred by distance, where maybe, just maybe, he was still alive. And far away, across the ocean, another person would vanish too. A disappearance no one could solve, until 2 decades later, when technology itself became the witness. William Earl Moult, Wellington, Florida, November 7th, 1997, a Friday night. A man finishing his drink, a phone call that would be the last anyone ever heard from him. William Earl Moult was 40 years old, a mortgage broker from Lantana, Florida, responsible, steady, not the kind of man who disappeared. That evening, he stopped by a nightclub in Lantana called Adult Nightclub, a familiar place, quiet by local standards. He wasn't a heavy drinker. Friends later said he'd had one, maybe 2 drinks. Around 9:30 p.m., he called his girlfriend, told her he was on his way home. His voice was calm. Nothing unusual. He got into his white 1994 Saturn SL and drove into the night. The distance from the club to his home was less than 10 miles. He never made it there. When William didn't show up, his girlfriend reported him missing the next day. Police traced his last known movements, retraced the route home, checked hospitals and tow records. There were no accidents, no reports of a crash, no trace of the car. It was as if he'd vanished mid-drive. Weeks passed, then months, then years. The case went cold. In 2000, detectives revisited the investigation. New mapping, sonar sweeps of nearby ponds, interviews with witnesses who remembered nothing new. Still nothing. Time did what it always does. It dulled the urgency, replaced questions with silence, but the mystery never left. Some people said he must have run away. Others thought he'd been carjacked, or worse. The truth was simpler and far more ordinary. It would take 22 years for that truth to be seen. August 2019. A man named Barry Fay sat at his computer in the Grand Isles neighborhood of Wellington, Florida, a quiet, gated community built long after Molt's disappearance. He was looking at satellite images of the area on Google Earth, checking property lines, neighborhood layouts, water retention ponds, and then he saw it. In one of the images, a dark pond behind Moonbay Circle, something caught his eye. A shape, long, pale, barely visible beneath the surface. He zoomed in. The outline was unmistakable. A car. Police arrived the next morning. The pond's waterline had receded slightly over the years, just enough for the vehicle's roof to sit near the edge. Divers went in. Minutes later, they found it. A white Saturn, heavily calcified, almost part of the Earth now. Inside were skeletal remains, still in the driver's seat. Seatbelt fastened. DNA confirmed what everyone had stopped expecting. William Molt had been found. Investigators concluded that he must have lost control of the car while driving home that night in 1997. A straight stretch of road, no guardrails, a turn that led directly toward the pond. No skid marks, no sign of braking. The car had gone in silently, headlights vanishing beneath the dark surface, the water closing in behind him. For more than 2 decades, neighbors had jogged past that pond. Children had played nearby. Houses had risen around the water. And all that time, he had been there, hidden beneath reflection and sunlight. Some mysteries are not solved by persistence. They're solved by time, and the quiet patience of the earth giving something back. And far from the flat, humid ponds of Florida, in the frozen wilderness of northern Pakistan, a discovery of a different kind was waiting. Not a vehicle in water, but a body preserved in ice, untouched by time for nearly 3 decades. Nasir Rudin, Kohistan region, northern Pakistan, 1997. High in the mountains, the air thins into silence. Snow drifts over jagged ridges. The world narrows to white and stone. Somewhere along a treacherous pass, a man named Nasir Rudin was making his way home. He was used to these mountains, the shifting ice, the way sound disappears into wind. Travel here was slow and dangerous, but for the people of Kohistan, it was life. That winter was harsher than most. Villages buried in snow, avalanches tearing through paths long trusted. And then, one day, Nasiruddin simply didn't return. He was reported missing after a storm. Men from his village searched what they could. Narrow trails, frozen streams, the base of the glacier. But it was like searching for a breath in the wind. The mountains took him, and with time, memory did too. Years passed, then decades. The story became something the elders mentioned quietly. A man who vanished into the ice, a name remembered only when snow began to fall. Until, nearly 28 years later, the glacier shifted. It began with meltwater trickling down the slopes, glacial ice receding in slow surrender. And then, as a sheet of blue-white broke away, something dark appeared beneath it. Herders were the first to see it. At first, they thought it was debris, a coat maybe, or the remains of a pack animal. But when authorities arrived, they realized what it was. A body, perfectly preserved, clothing intact, skin pale, almost waxen, untouched by decay. Time had stopped for Nasiruddin. The ice had kept him whole, his features recognizable, his belongings still pressed against him, as though he'd only fallen a few days earlier. Local officials identified him through what little documentation remained, confirming what few had dared to hope. It was the man who'd vanished in 1997. Forensic experts said the preservation was near total, a rare alignment of cold, dryness, and lack of oxygen. Even his watch had survived, frozen at the hour he'd last moved. In the years since, discoveries like this have become more common in the region, the Earth giving back what the glaciers have held for generations. Each thaw revealing another story sealed by cold. For Nasiruddin's family, it was both an ending and an opening, to see him again, to know, finally, that he hadn't vanished into myth, but into ice. The mountain had not devoured him, it had kept him. And thousands of miles away, in a desert of sand and sun, another mystery would emerge. Not from the cold, but from a single photograph found on a roadside in Florida, showing a girl and a boy bound in silence. Tara Calico, Belen, New Mexico. September 20th, 1988. Morning light spilled across the desert plain, thin, golden, and endless. The kind of light that makes everything look calm, even when it isn't. Tara Calico pedaled her pink Huffy bicycle along New Mexico State Road 47, a stretch of asphalt that cut straight through emptiness. She rode this route almost every day, past scrub and fences, timing herself by the mile markers. Her mother, Patty, had joked that she should carry pepper spray. Sometimes men in passing trucks would honk or slow down. But it was a small town. Nothing ever really happened here. That morning, Tara was wearing a white t-shirt with a print of First National Bank, green shorts, and white sneakers. She told her mother she'd be back by noon. They were supposed to play tennis later. Patty offered to follow her by car, just in case. Tara laughed and said no. She wanted to ride alone. By lunchtime, she hadn't returned. Patty drove the same route herself, eyes scanning the roadside. No sign of her daughter, no bicycle, no footprints, only wind moving through tall grass. By evening, the search was underway. Sheriff's deputies, volunteers, friends, all combed through the fields, ditches, and dry creek beds. They found a few clues, pieces of a broken Walkman, a cassette tape of her favorite band, Boston, cracked open near the shoulder of the road. But nothing else. Days passed. The desert gave no answers. It just kept its silence. Almost a year later, over 1,300 miles away, a woman walked out of a convenience store parking lot in Port St. Joe, Florida, holding a Polaroid photo she had just found. It lay face up in the dust beside a white van. The picture showed a young woman and a boy, both lying in the back of a van, bound and gagged with duct tape. They were alive. Their eyes were open, and the look in them, calm and pleading all at once, was what stayed with anyone who saw it. The woman called police. The photo was sent to investigators, then broadcast nationwide. Within days, it reached New Mexico, and when Patty Calico saw it, her world stopped. The girl in the photograph, she said, looked exactly like Tara. The same hairline, the same scar on the leg, even the same pink and black striped blanket that Tara used to keep on her bed. Experts examined it. FBI analysts enhanced the image, compared facial features, bone structures, eye spacing. Some said the resemblance was strong, others disagreed. Officially, the analysis was inconclusive. Still, the image burned its way into public consciousness. A girl who had vanished from a quiet New Mexico road, possibly alive somewhere, trapped in a van. The boy beside her was believed by some to resemble another missing child, Michael Henley, who had disappeared in the same region months before. But Henley's body was later found in the mountains, ending that theory. The van in the photo was never located. No one came forward. And the picture's origin, how it appeared on that Florida roadside, was never explained. Over the years, other Polaroids surfaced, more grainy images, Some real, some hoaxes, but none confirmed. And Tara Calico's trail grew colder with each one. Her mother continued searching, appearing on national talk shows, pleading for help. She collected tips, wrote letters, even kept a wall of maps and clippings at home, the coordinates of a mystery that refused to end. But time moved on. The case aged. Witnesses faded. Patty died in 2006, still believing her daughter was alive somewhere, waiting to be found. The official investigation remains open. In recent years, new technology and aging suspects have brought small waves of hope, but no closure, no body, no answers. Only the photograph, still circulating, still debated. A single instant of fear and possibility frozen forever. A picture that feels less like evidence and more like a question that can't be unasked. Sometimes, what the world leaves behind isn't a person, but an image, a reflection that outlives the truth. And as that Polaroid faded from headlines, across the ocean in Portugal, another photograph would appear. One that would awaken the same impossible hope. Lucas Ferreira, Central Coast, Portugal. Summer 2006. It was the kind of summer afternoon that stretched endlessly. The air heavy with salt and sunlight, the sound of children's voices rising from the streets near the open-air market. 9-year-old Lucas Ferreira left his home that day with a football tucked under one arm. He told his parents he was going to play near the market square, a familiar place, alive with vendors and the scent of grilled sardines. He wore a light t-shirt, shorts, and sneakers. Nothing unusual. Hours passed. The light began to fade, and the street that had always led him home stayed empty. When he didn't return by evening, his parents began to search. They checked the field where the children played, the market stalls, the old bus station by the sea. No one had seen him since the early afternoon. By nightfall, police and volunteers spread through the narrow lanes of the town, flashlights cutting through rows of shuttered windows. Search dogs traced the air along the coastline, through dunes and wooded patches where the sea wind carried every scent away. They found nothing. No clothing. No football. Not even footprints. For the first 2 days, investigators treated it as a possible accident. They searched the nearby cliffs and coves, dredged sections of the harbor, and checked hospitals across the region. But the water was calm. No body surfaced. A runaway was considered next, but quickly dismissed. Lucas had no money, no bag, no reason to leave. He was quiet, gentle, attached to home. He had plans to start school again in the fall. Within weeks, the case stalled. No witnesses, no leads. His parents posted flyers across the coastal towns, offering rewards, begging for information. Each day that passed blurred the trail a little more. And then, 4 years later, in 2010, a photograph surfaced. It began with a French family from Lyon uploading vacation pictures from their trip to Disneyland, Paris. They had spent the summer there, a family of 4, smiling beneath the castle towers, the air bright with music and crowds. In one image, taken while waiting in line for a ride, a boy stood beside 2 adults. At first glance, he was no one special, just another child lost in the background of a happy moment. But to those who had known Lucas, the resemblance was unmistakable. The same hairline, the same serious expression. The photo reached the Ferreira family through a distant relative who had seen it online. It spread quickly. And for the first time in years, hope stirred again. The French family who uploaded the photo were contacted. They confirmed the image was genuine, taken by them that summer at Disneyland, with no edits or alterations. They said they didn't know the boy or the adults beside him. He had simply been in the queue behind them. The picture was clear, not blurred or pixelated. The child's face was visible, painfully familiar. Even investigators admitted the resemblance was striking. But despite full cooperation from the family, no records linked any Portuguese visitors matching Lucas's description to the park that season. No ticket, no hotel check-in, no travel data. The boy in the photo was never identified, and how a Portuguese child missing for 4 years could appear in a French holiday picture remains unanswered. For Lucas's parents, That photograph became both comfort and curse, a window that could show them either everything or nothing at all. The official file on his disappearance remains open. He was never found, never confirmed dead, never seen again beyond that single uncertain image. Sometimes the world doesn't hide the truth, it just blurs it. And what remains is a family frozen between belief and loss, caught in the space between pixels and prayer. And while the sun set over Portugal's coast, in another part of Europe, behind a sealed apartment door in Zagreb, another kind of disappearance waited to be uncovered. One hidden not by distance, but by time itself. Hedviga Golic, Zagreb, Croatia, 1966 to 2008. It began with paperwork, a simple request for signatures during a building renovation. Routine, necessary, something that should have taken minutes. But one resident didn't answer. The neighbors of the old apartment block on Ulica Medveščak hadn't seen her in years. They thought she'd moved away, maybe to another part of Zagreb, maybe to live with family. No one could remember exactly when she'd left. She had simply vanished from their lives. Her name was Hedviga Golic, born in 1924. A nurse, quiet and solitary. She lived alone in an attic flat filled with books and porcelain cups. Neighbors said she was kind, polite, always neat, the sort of woman who greeted everyone but rarely lingered to talk. And then, sometime around 1966, she stopped being seen. No one noticed at first. The apartment stayed closed. Bills stopped arriving. Time passed. 10 years, 20, 40. New families moved into the building. Hedviga's name lingered on an old mailbox, half faded under the layers of paint. Then, on May 12, 2008, city officials arrived to finalize renovation forms. Every resident had to sign. When they reached the top floor, they found a locked door. No answer. No response. The lock was old, brittle with age. When they forced it open, a gust of air spilled out, stale, dry, untouched for decades. Inside, the apartment was frozen in another time. A small television sat in front of an armchair. A teacup rested neatly on a side table. Cobwebs hung in the corners like lace. Nothing was disturbed. Not the cushions, not the dishes, not even the calendar on the wall, still turned to 1966. And on the sofa, wrapped in blankets, lay the remains of Hedviga Golic. She had been sitting there as though she had just dozed off. A peaceful posture, hands folded, her head slightly turned toward the window. The room around her had mummified naturally, preserved by dry air and sealed walls. The investigators were stunned. More than 40 years she had been there, unseen, untouched, unnoticed. Her body was so well preserved that parts of the fabric on her clothes were still visible. Even the kettle on the stove had rusted around water that had long since evaporated. No one could say exactly how she died. Natural causes, most likely. She had made tea, turned on her television, and simply never gotten up again. Neighbors couldn't believe it. They had lived their lives beside her, raising families, celebrating birthdays, watching new generations come and go, all while Hedviga rested just beyond their walls. The power company had never cut her electricity. The building had changed owners multiple times. But no one in all those years had stepped inside that door. For decades, her apartment had existed as a capsule, a preserved memory of another Zagreb, sealed beneath dust and silence. It became a quiet symbol of the passage of time, how a life can disappear not into wilderness, but into neglect, not lost to danger, but to forgetfulness. And while her story faded into the news cycle, another woman's name began to surface hundreds of miles away, a body found on a hillside, wrapped in cold mist and mystery. She would be known not by who she was, but by where she lay. Lamduan Armitage, Yorkshire Dales, United Kingdom, September 2004 to March 2019. It was late summer in the Dales, the air thin, the wind restless, the hills rolling in quiet folds of green and stone. A pair of hikers were following the Pennine Way, a trail that threads through the high country like a scar, miles of heather, rock, and mist. Near the slopes of Pen y Ghent, Beside a stream that glimmered in weak sunlight, they stopped. Something pale was lying among the grass and stones. It wasn't debris. It wasn't an animal. It was a woman. No identification. No witnesses. Just a body, partially concealed, dressed in light clothing, her skin marked by cold and exposure. The police sealed the area. Forensic teams combed through the hillside. No sign of violence was immediately visible. No nearby campsite. No possessions, except fragments of fabric and jewelry. She was buried under a name the world gave her, the Lady of the Hills. Years passed. Detectives searched missing persons records across the UK and Europe. No match. Her face was reconstructed, released to the public in hopes that someone, somewhere, might recognize her. No one did. The case became part of local folklore. Hikers whispered about the woman found in the heather, the mystery that the hills refused to give up. Forensic tests revealed fragments of her story. She was of Asian descent, small-framed, likely in her 30s when she died. Her teeth suggested she had lived in Asia before moving to Britain. Her death was not recent. She had lain on that hillside for weeks before being discovered. Then, in 2019, 15 years later, science finally reached what memory could not. DNA analysis, newer, sharper, connected to global databases, found a match. Thousands of miles away, in Thailand, a family had submitted their DNA in hope of answers. It matched the woman in the Dales. Her name was Lamduan Sikanya Armitage. Born in Thailand in 1971. Married to a British man, living for a time in Lancashire, a mother of two. Her family had lost contact years earlier, unsure where she had gone or why. When police confirmed her identity, the world learned the real name behind the legend. The Lady of the Hills was not a ghost, not a stranger, but a daughter who had crossed continents and vanished into silence. Detectives reopened the case. They traced her final steps, her move to the UK, the life she built, the arguments, the distance that grew between her and those she loved. But no one has ever been charged. Her death remains unexplained. No proven crime, no clear cause, only the certainty of where she was found and who she had been. Her parents in Thailand built a small shrine in her memory, placing her photograph among incense and flowers. For them, the mountain that had held her became sacred ground, a place where loss met closure. For years, the Dales had kept her secret, carved in wind and rain. And when they finally spoke, they gave her back her name. But not every disappearance ends in death. Sometimes the missing walk back into the world on their own, alive, changed, carrying the weight of years spent in silence. Brenda Heist, Lititz, Pennsylvania, 2002 to 2013. It began like any other weekday. February 2002. The air cold and still over Lititz, Pennsylvania. Brenda Heist dropped her two children off at school that morning. She hugged them goodbye, told them she'd see them that afternoon. She had errands to run, laundry to fold, dinner to plan. Normal things. Small pieces of a normal life. She never came home. That night, her husband, Lee, called friends, hospitals, police. No one had seen her. No note. No sign of struggle. Her car was still parked outside their home. For days, the community searched. Fields, parking lots, nearby rivers. Flyers went up across Lancaster County, her smile printed beneath the word, missing. Weeks passed, then months, and eventually, years. In 2010, 8 years after she vanished, Brenda Heist was declared legally dead. Her family held a memorial. Her children, now teenagers, learned to speak about her in the past tense. But the truth was stranger than any theory the police had imagined. 11 years after she disappeared, in 2013, a woman walked into a sheriff's office in Key Largo, Florida. She looked tired, thin, older than her years. And when the officer asked her name, she said quietly, "My name is Brenda Heist." At first, they didn't believe her. She had no ID, no money, no address. But her fingerprints matched. The DNA confirmed it. It was her. She was alive. The story she told was fragmented, a tale of impulse and exhaustion. She said she'd been overwhelmed, that after dropping off her children that morning in 2002, she'd sat in her car and cried. At a nearby park, she met a group of drifters, 3 strangers about to hitchhike to Florida. She joined them. No plan, no phone call home. She simply left. Over the years, she lived a transient life, sleeping under bridges, cleaning houses, sometimes using different names. She said she was homeless, moving from town to town, never staying anywhere long enough to explain who she really was. She watched news stories about missing people, saw her own face on posters, and said nothing. She didn't call her family. She didn't write. She just kept walking. When she finally turned herself in, she said she was tired of running, tired of pretending to be someone who had never existed. Back in Pennsylvania, the news spread fast. A woman once buried by paperwork and memory had reappeared in the flesh. Her husband, who had since remarried, told reporters he was relieved but couldn't understand. Her children were adults by then. They struggled to reconcile the mother they'd lost with the woman who had chosen to vanish. Brenda said she regretted what she had done, that she had been lost in her own life, and that somewhere along the way, she had forgotten how to find her way back. She was given help, housing, a chance to begin again. But some disappearances leave shadows that never lift, not on the missing, and not on those left behind. For the world, her return was a miracle. For her family, it was a reopening of a wound long scarred. Some stories end in discovery, others in acceptance. But a few, like Brenda's, end in the uneasy place between the two. Because being found is not the same as coming home.